What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So this is the 2023 Motorola Moto G Play, and it is the worst phone of the year by far. I'm sorry if you bought this. I'm not trying to be mean or make you feel bad about your purchase. Even the cheapest, lowest spec'd smartphone is still useful for some people. I totally get that. It's just, even if you only have $100 to spend, or even if you're getting this phone for free from a major carrier, it's simply just not worth it when you consider all of the other smartphones, both new and old, that you could buy instead. Now, I also know that this isn't a new phone. It's been out for like 8 months already. But the thing about Motorola devices is that they tend to be heavily promoted on Amazon. They always seem to be on sale for a big discount, which probably entices people. The holiday shopping season is fast approaching, and these phones are sold for a long period of time, sometimes over the course of 2 or more years from the major carriers. All of this is a recipe for Motorola to wind up attracting a ton of customers to this phone over the next few months and beyond, and I want to make sure a potential purchaser has all the information. Also, if you already watched Marquez's video on this phone from a while back, a lot of his thoughts and information are now totally outdated. This phone is an even worse buy than it already was when it first launched, and I'm gonna explain why. There's really 2 main issues with the 2023 Moto G Play. It's a parts bin special, a phone that was put together with cheap or outdated physical components Motorola probably had lying around from previous phones over the years, and it also has the slowest and clunkiest software experience. Still Android 12, by the way, which at this point is just unacceptable. Physically, the Moto G Play looks like a Motorola device from a year or 2 ago. It didn't get the refreshed design like all the other Moto G devices, so it doesn't even fit in the lineup, and more closely resembles the design of the 2021 G Stylus or 2022 G Power. Perhaps Motorola did in fact use the actual rear cover of a smartphone from a couple of years ago for this G Play. At 6.5 inches, it's a pretty big phone. I know a lot of people will appreciate the big display, but with those thick black borders and huge bottom chin, there's a ton of wasted space, and the phone feels a lot bigger and a lot taller than it probably should with such a low screen-to-body ratio. The design overall mimics a budget device from a number of years ago. The final outdated design cue is that Motorola dimple around back. That's the fingerprint sensor, something Motorola had on their smartphones for a long time, but not within the last year or 2. Except for this phone. The fingerprint sensor works just fine, and I actually don't mind the placement. It just doesn't align with anything that's been released this year. The G Play does have a couple of other physical things that people might appreciate, like an SD card slot, but this phone only has 32 gigabytes of internal storage. It has to have an SD card if you want to install any more than like a dozen apps on it, or if you wind up taking a couple hundred pictures. I'm honestly stunned that Motorola shipped a phone with this little internal storage. It's not like storage is all that expensive nowadays anyway, and I mean 50% of it is used up right out of the box by the OS and pre-installed apps. It's crazy. There's a headphone jack on this phone, which is nice, I guess, and it charges via USB-C, which might seem like an odd thing to say, but the cheapest Samsung A series phones sometimes still have micro USB ports. Seriously, so at least it's not that bad. Now, for as nice as the big screen might seem on this phone, it's actually a pretty poor viewing experience overall. This is a 720p resolution screen, which means at this size, you can literally pick out the pixels from a normal viewing distance. You get a pixel density of just 270 pixels per inch, so it's not sharp by any means, and it's also not very bright at all. In fact, I found it to be the dimmest Moto G device by far. At 60 or 70% brightness, this phone is comparable to other Moto G devices set to 20 or 30% brightness. Off-axis viewing is also quite poor, and all of this is because it's an IPS LCD display. And not a new one at that. There aren't any specs that stand out with the display, and it doesn't seem to be covered in any notable current Gorilla Glass, so the glare is pretty bad too. It is a 90 Hz display though, which theoretically would mean that it's fast and fluid and snappy with your taps and swipes, but the phone performs so poorly that it never actually looks like it's running at 90 Hz. There's never a smooth scroll or a seamless app transition at all, so I don't even understand why they bothered with 90 Hz. Naturally, we need to talk about performance now, and the software experience. And this is actually where Marquez's original thoughts on this phone have sort of become outdated. Inside, this phone is powered by the MediaTek Helio G37 processor, which is an entry-level chipset that was originally launched in 2020. So we're talking a nearly 3-year-old low-level processor inside this phone. You also get 3 gigabytes of RAM, which is 1 gig less than what I would consider to be the bare minimum for any smartphone nowadays. And worst of all, as of August, when I'm filming this video, the Moto G Play is still running Android 12. So the hardware is bad enough. Here are the Geekbench scores, but you don't need a complicated performance test to show that this phone can't handle much. Just open 3 or 4 apps and you'll quickly see that it's slow and clunky and oftentimes totally unresponsive. Is it usable? Sure, I guess. If you just need a phone to make a phone call or to look something up on the internet from time to time, then yeah, it's a phone. It's at least going to keep you connected to the world. But I wouldn't say that it's reliable. I wouldn't say that you could do anything quickly or efficiently. I'd even go as far as to say it's an outright frustrating experience just trying to do those basic tasks. And I'm not sure why, even for $100 or so, or even for free, that anyone would subject themselves to something like this. The lack of a major Android update, though, is what really grinds my gears. In Marquez's video, one of the points he made was that even for as cheap and as low spec as this phone is, it's still modern and current, and it'll get Android updates that like a 2 or 3 year old smartphone that might also be $100 or $200 wouldn't otherwise get. But now, 8 months later after that video, we see that that's literally not the case. This phone doesn't have the Android 13 update, even though we're weeks away now from Android 14 launching on flagship devices. So buying the Moto G Play right now literally means you're buying a 2023 device with a 2022 software experience and internal specs from 2020. It's unequivocally not a modern Android device by definition, certainly not in software and especially not in hardware. And this is where the argument of buying a couple years older device that does get Android updates is even stronger. For a little more than $100 right now, you could get a renewed Samsung A51, which has Android 13 and also just has better specs across the board. Or you could get 20 other Samsung smartphones. I mean, even the A03s, for as bad as those are, at least got updated. You could also get a used Pixel 4a for $130. Even the Nokia G10 has Android 13. And I know what you're thinking. Won't all those phones be done getting updates after this year while the Moto G Play gets more updates in the future? Literally no. Motorola promises only one major update for this phone. So whenever it does get Android 13, that's it. And is it really an update if Motorola is already a year behind anyway? They're basically a year behind right now. And look, I know not everyone even cares about Android updates, but you should a little bit, because at a bare minimum, it shows that any company like Motorola cares about supporting its customers during the duration of time they own their products. And it also protects the consumer from security issues and app compatibility problems and other software bugs. To Motorola's credit, there have been some minor software updates for this phone up to this point, but I think the combination of old, underpowered internal components and last year's software just leads me to believe that this phone is more or less a quick cash grab from an unsuspecting customer who just needs any phone. And Motorola isn't concerned with what happens afterwards, but that really isn't how you should be treating a customer. On the bright side, since this phone has a dim, low-resolution display, the least powerful processor available, and basically one-year-old software, if you do end up actually using this phone, it'll last for forever. The 5,000 milliamp battery inside this thing easily carries the phone through 2 days of light use, which is probably how most people would use this phone anyway. But the few times it does need to be plugged in, well, with just 10-watt wired charging speeds, you'll be waiting around 3 or 4 hours at least before it juices back up to 100%. And last but not least, the cameras are also bad. That shouldn't be surprising at this point. Essentially, Motorola just took all the spare old camera parts they had lying around, the cheapest ones possible, and used them here. You get a 16 megapixel main lens, and then the 2 megapixel macro and 2 megapixel depth sensor, both of which are the quintessential quintessential budget phone camera add-ons that are basically worthless. The selfie camera is also a rough 5-megapixel shooter. The camera features include portrait mode, pro controls, panorama, and time-lapse, and that's basically it. No night mode, no slow-mo, no video stabilization, no video shooting beyond 1080 30, no wide angle. I mean, can you take a picture or video with this phone? Yes. Is it going to look good? No, not at all. There's no detail at all in any shot. It's a ridiculously over-processed image with smoothed out bits in some areas and choppy bits in other areas. Way too saturated. The dynamic range is awful. Video is so incredibly choppy and out of focus. This just is not a camera setup you'd expect to have on any phone in 2023, regardless of the price point. Now look, I know I'm probably sounding pretty harsh, but here's the bottom line. Motorola, a company that seems to want to be environmentally friendly with their soy ink and minimal cardboard boxes with no charging accessories, released a phone that is arguably e-waste. It's a phone that consists of parts and pieces from devices that launched 2 or 3 years ago. They have, up to this point, not even bothered to keep the phone updated software-wise, but yet they originally launched and sold this thing for $170. It obviously wasn't worth that price. It's not even selling at that price anymore. And even at its perpetual discount of like $100 or so, there's 20 other smartphones I would recommend instead of this one. Even older budget phones that are at least updated to Android 13. This phone, to be brutally honest, is just a cash grab, deceptively aimed at individuals who just need a cheap phone to stay connected to the world, but who wind up wasting their hard-earned money on something that's outdated, frustrating to use, won't ever get updated seemingly, and is just a total waste of money. It won't last a person more than a year anyway, so please don't buy this thing. And Motorola, quit releasing phones like this. There's no reason to. So there you go. Those are my honest thoughts on the 2023 Moto G Play. What do you guys think? Am I being too harsh? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though, or at least found it somewhat helpful. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.